the impact of Nelson Mandela, the aftermath of the memorial service in South Africa, and where do we need to go as Americans in following the legacy of the global icon. Coming up next on Get Right with Lenny McAllister, starting right
now. Get Right with Lenny McAllister.
As Brother Malcolm said, we declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be given the rights of a human being, to be respected in this society which we intend to bring into existence.
By any means necessary.
The way we help bring back America and we build the bridges and bring people together is by making sure we hold everybody accountable in a 360 fashion.
So let me close with this. Yes, there is a change that we can believe in, but it will never come from a politician or a government program.
We cannot find physical standing here in the land of Lincoln from Carbondale to Elgin that we can collectively tolerate the insanity found on the streets of South Chicago and East Texas.
We got to move away from the American Idol soundbite nature of politics and back to the American statesman of humble servant leadership that we used to see in politics.
It is time to roll out the era of the new, educated, engaged, and energized American citizen.
I go do the jail ministry. I speak to the kids in the streets. So I'm never going to lay down being a conservative just as much as I'll never lay down being a proud African American.
I feel like a black republic. Money I got coming in. Can't turn my back on the hood. I got love for them. Can't clean my act.
Happy Tuesday afternoon, and welcome to another wonderful edition of Get Right with Lenny McAllister. You know the drill. I'm going to jump right into it. You know what you need to do. If you want to get in touch with me via Twitter, very simple. LennyMcAllister. You and I can dialogue there. Love to get your feedback. Of course, if you want to Facebook me and do what all the cool kids do on Facebook, very simple. Go to tinyurl.com/LennyPage. It's tinyurl.com/Lenny page. Looking forward to your comments. As you well know, today was the day of the Mandela Memorial. And I said previously that I would take the time to make sure that we talked about this at length. I did not want to take the time to talk about this in a very flippant way. I mean, I wanted to talk about unemployment yesterday. I wanted to talk about the economic numbers. I wanted to talk about why people aren't as excited as one would think they would be about the economic numbers that are out there. So I knew that people would want to talk about Mandela, the legacy of Mandela, and how things were going to play out in South Africa with President Obama going down there, the other living presidents, aside from George H.W. Bush, going down to Soweto on Tuesday to pay their respects to the global icon. So I asked everybody to take a moment and just take a breath. Take a breath for a second. We would talk about it on Tuesday, and lo and behold, here we are. So again, I love your feedback on Twitter or on Facebook. Hit me up. You know what to do. Now, first things first. I wrote an article on Global Grind that actually was published Monday evening going into Tuesday. And it seems to echo some of the sentiments that President Obama mentioned in his speech, which is, look, we have to, particularly as Americans, and I think this is very, very on point right now. And again, love your feedback. We're at a point of time nationally where it's very, very easy and it's very much encouraged that when you get the numbers on your side, when you win the political battle, when you have the perseverance to get through a certain construct or a certain obstacle, to stick it to your political enemy. And that's been the antithesis of what the Mandela legacy was coming out of jail. A lot of people want to focus on why he went to jail. A lot of people, conservatives, and I'll get into that in just a second. Conservatives want to bring out the Marxist, the communism, this, that, and the other. Let's focus on after jail. Because the truth of the matter is very, very simple. Black South Africans had the numbers on their side. Apartheid was crumbling. Mandela was released. And then he was elected president in 1994. Very, very easy for him to, one, institute himself as president for life, which means that he'd have been president for another roughly 20 years. Well, about 15 years. 99 is when he left office. About 15 years. It's number one. Number two, there was an opportunity to absolutely get into a mindset of retribution and crush those that led to him having to give up 27 years of his life in jail. Give up health, give up seeing his family, and all the things that come with being a political prisoner, which, by the way, it's not the same as doing time because you shoplifted. So let's make sure that people understand that when you're a political prisoner in a jail with those types of regimes, whether it was back in the 70s and 80s, actually 60s, 70s, and 80s with Mandela's case, or, heaven bless those that are in the jails in North Korea or that used to be in the Gulag in the former Soviet Union, there's a level of expectation where you're going to be dehumanized. It's not just being incarcerated. So when you go through that for 27 years, knowing that you're standing on the side of right, and then you're finally released from jail. And not only are you released from jail, but you're given the opportunity to get payback in a very high level, in a very strong fashion, and in a way where everybody will mostly say, well, they had it coming to them. To step aside from that shows political character, that shows grace under fire, etc. Now, why do I bring that up? Because with President Obama going down to South Africa and talking about we need to follow the legacy of Mandela, it's very similar to the article I wrote on Monday night. Not saying he stole my notes, but I'm just saying. Not saying, but I'm just saying. I'm kidding, maybe. Anywho, it's the same sentiment that I'd have to imagine a lot of people have said, which is we can reflect upon the legacy of Nelson Mandela, or we can follow it in a very tangible and real fashion, in a manner through which we can find the best of ourselves moving forward. And I think that's obviously admirable. But let's just be honest. Whether we're talking about President Obama, whether we're talking about the Republicans, whether we're talking about the Tea Party element, whether we're talking about the progressives in 2009, in 2010, regardless of what the case may be. And I'm not saying people can't change. I'm just putting it out there when you start looking at American politicians over the last several years. Have they followed the methodology that Nelson Mandela post-prison, pre-president, or even president, first black president of South Africa? Did they follow the model that he put into place? The answer is no, because every single time, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, any time they got the numbers on their sides, it was stick the knife into the political opponent and twist and twist and twist. And what do we end up getting? A whole lot of animosity, more payback build up, if you will. And then as soon as the election flips over, what do you get on the other side? Someone taking a rustier knife and sticking it deeper into their political opponent's back or stomach or heart or eye or whatever the animosity leads them to stick it into, and they twist harder. And what does that lead to? A continued divisiveness throughout America. And when you look at what we're facing as Americans, and you look at where we need to go from a civic standpoint, from a political standpoint, the things that we need to put into place, the type of partnerships that we need to put into place in order to get us out of the malaise, out of the apathy. I talked about this yesterday. Pretty good economic numbers. No one seems to care. No one seems to believe in the numbers. Working class Americans, poor Americans, people sliding out of the middle class, they don't believe these numbers. It's the economists and the politicians and the talking heads that are excited about Friday's numbers, not everyday Americans. There's a malaise and apathy, a lack of trust that's out there right now. And the reason why that's there is because we have not yet quite followed the legacy of Nelson Mandela. We have not quite sat there and thought about what we need to do to put aside the higher ground from a number standpoint, the higher ground from a political standpoint, the higher ground from an election standpoint. And what do we need to do moving forward from a leadership standpoint? That's the legacy of Nelson Mandela. Now, I know that President Obama kind of talked about that during his speech, and I'm sure that other politicians and leaders were there talking about the greatness that Mr. Mandela had towards bringing about freedom and justice and equality and civil rights, and they're all correct on that. But as I put in my article, as others have talked about today, as you're hearing throughout the media today, and again, I want your feedback on Twitter or on Facebook. What will people do tomorrow? What will people do December 11th? Yeah, for example, when President Obama kind of took the dig at Castro, saying, hey, there are some people that say they stand with Mandela, but stand with Mandela. I was going to say Mandiba. I understand the term, but my thing is this. Yeah, to me, I get the Mandiba term, and that's cool. But Mandela, the name, to me, and maybe it's just my generation, Generation X. Maybe it's because we grew up at a time where apartheid was catching attention with all the divestment of Coca-Cola and everything else that was going on college campuses, in high schools, in the communities, with the concert that Paul Simon did in the 80s, etc. Maybe it's just the name Mandela just started meaning so much by the time my generation was growing through their formative years that the other terms, I get it, I understand them. But to me, you could just say Mandela, and that says all you need to say. So pardon me if I don't go into other loving terms, because I think Mandela is a loving enough term. So that's just my take on that, just putting that out there. But with that said, when you look at where we are as a people, as an American people, when you see how, for example, President Obama dug at Castro in regards to, hey, there are people that say that they stood with Mandela when it came to freedom and justice, but they won't let their own people speak out in dissent when they have a disagreement. I mean, there's two things in that. Number one, he's correct. You're starting to talk about the Cubans, you talk about other regimes, and that is a true statement. But this is also a president that just got over a controversy with the IRS auditing conservative groups, and just has gone through other controversies with the NSA and other things going on there, and other accusations of not being the most transparent of administrations, despite the promise of hope and change coming into 2008. From the White House down, there have been plenty of opportunities to start modifying how we deal with each other politically. And let's just be fair. Regardless of whether it's a Democrat or Republican, blue area, red area, Tea Party driven or far left driven California. Just kidding, somewhat. Regardless of what area you're talking about, the truth of the matter is extremism has been pushing both sides. And Mandela, somebody that went from being a nonviolent activist to looking and saying, nonviolence isn't working here, and we have the numbers. And by the way, let me get into this now before I run out of time. Any conservative that is upset that Mandela was a communist and a Marxist and considered a terrorist, number one, they had the numbers. They had the numbers. This is the same evaluation that General Washington made, that President Lincoln made. Do we have the numbers, the resources, and the willpower to win this battle for liberty? And if the answer is yes, then we use all advantages that we have before us in order to bring about liberty, justice, and equality. What is the difference between Valley Forge, Gettysburg, and Soweto? When you're talking about liberty, not much difference at all. So everybody that wants to go claim Washington, everybody that wants to go claim Lincoln, everybody that wants to go claim, well, I even said this in the article, their Southern heritage, fighting for states' rights, or whatever you want to call it. There's no difference between people that were doing that to fight against what they saw as tyranny and black South Africans, especially considering that they were the majority. Especially considering that in America's cases, the ones that I just brought up, people shed blood. What's the problem with shedding blood in South Africa? Other than the fact that Reagan was against it, and he was wrong on this. He was against the side of history he needed to be on in this instance, and he eventually got that despite going against Congress, and Congress basically having a buck back on him. That's number one. Number two, let's just be honest, there are people that are uncomfortable seeing a majority of black people basically brutalize a minority of white people in South Africa. Now, not that I'm advocating violence, but again, when you start talking about liberty, it's not romanticized when it comes to 1865 or 1861 or 1776 or 1945 with the atomic bomb or in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. I get all those things, and that makes sense to me. And I am a guy that doesn't want to see bloodshed. But when you start talking about that, you cannot limit the pursuit of happiness. That, by the way, according to the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution, does not come from government. It comes from God, that government has to protect and make sure that tyrants don't try to take something that's God-given away from everyday people. That is what our Constitution is supposed to protect us from. And if that's the case, and we believe that's from God, is God just an American God? Don't answer that question. I know some of you want to answer a particular way. I'm going to answer for you. The answer is no. It's obvious. It is clear. Therefore, as people come to the table and start calling Nelson Mandela a communist, a Marxist, a terrorist, because he had to switch at the time. Because again, if he were that much of a communist, that much of a Marxist, and that much of a tyrant, that much of a bloodthirsty tyrant, he would not have relinquished power before the turn of the 20th century. That's all there is to it. That is game, set, match with that argument. This is a man that took the means necessary to bring about equality and freedom for black South Africans. And that is part of what I argue this repeatedly. I will be talking about this on my McAllister Minute coming up on the American Urban Radio Network this week. So make sure you tune in, AURN.com, starting Wednesday. This is the argument that I make. Time and time again, conservatives are on the wrong side of civil rights. On the wrong side of civil rights. We stand on the sidelines and we don't get involved. Then, when people push back, if it doesn't look like Thomas Jefferson, if it doesn't look like, I won't even say Abraham Lincoln, because you get a lot of people that Tea Party rhetoric, they see the Confederacy's point of view. And that, to me, is a problem. States' rights over human dignity, that's a problem. Because you can't claim human dignity in one regard and then say, but on the other hand, they were slaves. It doesn't work that way. It's dichotomous. And that's what people get about the conservative movement from time to time, is the fact that we're dichotomous when it comes to expressions of liberty. And this is an example of this. Anytime I go to Facebook, and again, agree, disagree, you know where to find me on Twitter, know where to find me on Facebook. Heck, you'll bash me there or you'll praise me there one way or another. Anytime I can go to Facebook or to Twitter, and I can see some of the nasty comments said about a 95-year-old that impacted the world in a positive way and pushed for peace and healing after decades of bloodshed, you might as well sit there and say that Mother Teresa was a drug pusher. I mean, come on. There's, at some point in time, and I say this from the bottom of my heart to my conservative brethren, I mean it, conservatives, listen. At some point in time, the definitions of liberty, justice, equality, fairness, you're going to have to expand who those apply to. And collectively, we're going to have to understand that liberty in urban America does not mean the same to those living in rural America that don't need government for much of anything because they've owned the land for 100 years. If you're a farmer and you've owned the land for 100 years and you create your own food, or you're in rural America and you're paying low taxes and you're working at a home-based business, or you're working at a family business that's been around for 80 years, or whatever the case may be, you're going to view liberty and opportunity and justice in a completely different way than a 25-year-old growing up on the south side of Chicago, or that had grown up on the south side of Chicago, or a college student in Washington, D.C., or A 14-year-old Latino that's there legally, that is an American citizen, that's walking the streets, but is picked up and accused of being illegal. I mean, these are things that we have to address in a very honest fashion. And that's one of the things that, as I close today, that we have to make sure that we're looking at with the legacy of Mandela. I have to imagine that the time he spent in jail, he was being honest with himself. He was being honest with his assessments as to what South Africa needs to look like if apartheid is ever ended. What does leadership need to do, need to say, need to embrace, need to heal when it comes to what life would look like there if apartheid ended? Because the bottom line is this: there was no guarantee that he was going to get out of jail before apartheid ended. There was no guarantee that apartheid was going to end in 1994 or before then. There was no guarantee he was going to get out of jail and they were going to deconstruct apartheid as rapidly as they did. I mean, there could have been calls for, we need to do this over the course of a generation. We need to do this over the course of 20 years. Those are arguments that people probably did make that weren't successful. But if Mandela can sit in a jail cell and can think this through and can come out as a healer and a leader and an inspiration, what can we do with American politics? How do we follow the Mandela legacy with a sense of honor, not just a sense of reflection? That, particularly my fellow conservatives, is my challenge today. As I close out, that's my challenge. Can you see conservatism, conservative principles, as far as fighting for justice and liberty and doing things by any means necessary, as appropriate and deemed by God to bring about a better America? If you can do that, if we can do that, that will help us in many, many ways live up to the legacy of Mandela on American soil. What's your take on this? I know I ran out of time. I would love to talk about this longer, but I'm going to leave it up to you now. You know where to find me on Twitter, LennyMcAllister. On Facebook, you know the deal, tinyurl.com/Lenny Page. Looking forward to hearing your feedback. You have a wonderful Tuesday. If you got a chance to see the memorial service, great. If not, I'm sure there are repeats online as well as on television. Let's talk for the rest of this week. I will catch up to you tomorrow. You have a wonderful, wonderful day. TCNGB. Be careful in the snow out there, by the way. Take care and God bless. Peace.